Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Gus Sadowitz, commonly known as Gus. My mother came from Czechoslovakia. My father came from Lithuania. The first time they met was in Beira, in Mozambique, and neither of them had a common language. My mother spoke German and Czech, and my father spoke Russian, Yiddish, and a smattering of English. That was an arranged wedding, an arranged marriage, and the conditions were if they wanted to get divorced the next day, they could. Anyway, they stayed together until they both died. To say they stayed together very happily is not true, but they stayed together. My father, like most Greeners in Rhodesia, worked as a storekeeper in the eastern districts. I was born in Bulawayo, and then my mother was there with me, my father was working. So then I moved to the eastern districts with my mother, and my mother came from a very aristocratic family. And my father was a typical Lettischer peasant. He was a very bright man, but he wasn't a cultured man. You know, the art and the music and the dressing, etc. These weren't important things in his life. And we lived in this house adjacent to the store. The nearest white people were in Inyuzura, which was about 20 miles away. And that's where the Margolis dynasty started, Olivine. So every Sunday...
There was also the Buffensteins.
And the Buffensteins.
That's right.
And every Sunday we used to go to the Louis Buffenstein's farm. And all the Jews used to get together there. And you would think you were at an English tea party. That's the way they behaved. Except my father with his Lettischer accent, and my mother, they didn't behave accordingly. Anyway, I didn't have any white friends until I was about the age of 6. Then I went to school in Salisbury. I went to a boarding school there, and at the age of 6, my mother came to visit me, and she threw her hands up in horror, and she said, my Meshka can't stay here. So she moved into Salisbury, and my dad stayed at the store. And we managed to get, this was just after the war, a little one-room flat, 7 miles out of town. And that's where we stayed. And my mother was a very strong person, and she stayed there. Slowly but surely, we made progress. Then my father moved into town, and we started off on the wrong side of the tracks in Eastleigh, Salisbury. And I went to a school called David Livingstone. At this school, there were 600 pupils and a handful. I mean a handful, I think we were 7 Jews. And there was a headmaster there, his name was Mr. Lloyd. He was the most wonderful person in the world. Now, according to British tradition, every day was started off with an opening ceremony and a prayer. And I remember I went to high school in Prince Edward, and when this prayer was said, all the Jews and the minorities and the Catholics had to wait outside while the prayer was said, and then we filed in like second-class citizens afterwards. But this gentleman, Mr. Lloyd, made it his business. He conferred with Reverend Papo and Reverend Converser to find a common prayer which was accepted by all.
Basically the Old and the New Testament, I presume.
Yeah, by everybody. And at the school, funnily enough, my whole experience in Rhodesia, I didn't come across any open anti-Semitism. I remember there was hidden anti-Semitism, but no open anti-Semitism. I had an idyllic childhood because I loved nature and I loved sport. And I had all sorts of friends, obviously many, many non-Jewish friends. And our house was like an open house. They came to our house, my non-Jewish friends, because my mother was such a good cook. And the fridge was always open to them. Now, then I finished at Prince Edward School.
Were you in any Jewish youth?
Habonim to me was the greatest thing in the world.
Can you talk a bit about that experience?
Habonim, yes. I have a few ex-madrichim sitting here, notably Baz and Harold. They were madrichim. I started at the age of 8. And I went to my first national camp, Leeches Bay. I was underage illegally, because I gave the forms to my parents and I said, sign here. They didn't know what they were signing. They said, what is it? I said, for our boarding camp in East London. I was 8 and the minimum age was 10. From the age of 8 until the age of about 18, I went to 10 camps. Experiences like this I have seldom had. Not only that, but we used to meet with Bulawayo. Every Roads and Founders, we used to host every alternate Roads and Founders, we hosted them and they hosted us. And also we used to have seminars. So you speak as Abonim as if it, for us it was more of a social gathering than anything else. Everything else was by the side, Israel and this and Ben Gurion. That was by the side. The most important thing was to go and have a bloody good time, which we managed. And then, of course, one went up the ladder, you became a madrich, and then you left the movement. But I still have very good friends that I met at East London, Habonim camp, and I'm still in contact with. So that really played a very big role in our lives.
Including a decision to come to live here?
No, funnily enough, not.
No.
If you want to know about our decision to come and live here, I came here. We lived in London for a considerable amount of time. Paulette had travelled. I never travelled. I came to London, I was a real Rhodesian jungle boy. To the extent that my eyes nearly fell out of my head the first time I saw a black and white holding hands. It was as bad as that. Then I came to Israel 2 weeks after the 6-day war was finished, and the country was absolutely in euphoria. And I thought to myself, what a wonderful country. Here people live the lifestyle that I enjoy. Walking around in shorts and sandals, etc., etc. But I wouldn't say that Zionism as such played a big role in my life. It was really wonderful to be. I had lots of friends, and I traveled around Israel, with a backpack and on buses. It was great. Paulette wasn't with me. She went back to South Africa because her brother came to volunteer here and she thought he was a big hero. But that was an arrangement that we had. After that we went to Rhodesia, where we lived for 8 years. And of course we all know what life was like in Rhodesia, all the comforts in the world, servants, etc., etc. And one day Paulette and I were sitting on the veranda at 5 o'clock, and Paulette said to me, are we going to live like this all our lives? So I said, definitely not. So she said, let's move. So I said, where do you want to move to, Paulette? She didn't even think about any other place. She said, Israel. So I said, when do you want to move? She said, tomorrow. So I said, Paulette, you can't move tomorrow. I said, we've got to arrange things. So she said, you go to Israel and you arrange things. I got on the plane Thursday, and Sunday I called her in Rhodesia and I said, Paulette, in 1 year's time, we're coming to live in Israel. And since then, I personally, talking for myself, Paulette has, I've never looked back.
What year was this that you came?
1975. Never ever looked back. I've had the most wonderful time here. I find Israel, people are wonderful, very stimulating. Unfortunately, with the political problems we have here, that's what we have. That's what we must do the most about. Another reason why I wanted to leave Rhodesia, a very important reason, I didn't want my children to grow up the way I did, seeing this big part between white and black. When I was younger and I was innocent, it was part of life there. It was the accepted thing. But as I got older, I realized that I didn't want my children to grow up like that. And as a result, they came to Israel, and they didn't grow up like that. To the extent that one evening we were watching a basketball game, and I said to my son, who's that big black guy there? He's fantastic. He said to me, Abba, why don't you just say, who's that big player there? He's fantastic. That was his attitude to it. And I've got nothing much bad to say about Rhodesia, except we all know what the political situation was, and I grew up with it, and my mother and my father also accepted what was going on. I remember certain pictures in my mind, my mother walking around with a big bunch of keys, Chas v'chalila, servant should have an extra spoon of sugar. You know, and she was considered a kind person, but that's what it was. And as a result, we're here, and I enjoyed it. We have a large family in Israel, and that's it. That's it. If you want to ask more questions about Rhodesia, I've got, apart from the political situation, it really suited me personally. The nature, the people were very nice. I was a little bit anti-British as such, but not anti-Rhodesian. Just the whole concept of the British. My dad was an Anglophile, and he thought they were the beginning of the end of everything. And we used to have discussions, but not arguments.
Were your parents still alive when you left?
Yes.
So
It was a situation, my mother said to me, "You are crazy." And she had family here. "Look what you're leaving behind. A beautiful house and a swimming pool and a tennis court and a beautiful practice. And you're going to that country, you don't know how hard life is there." And my father said, "Gay gesundte het mijn kinderen." So I said to them after, "Dad, why don't you come to Israel?" He spoke fluent Hebrew with a European accent. He said he's been here on numerous occasions, and what hurts him the most, it's funny, I'll never forget it, is to see a Jewish dustman walking around and collecting all the dust and the garbage. That's what hurt him the most. And funnily enough, my mother was so much against it, and my father died. And lo and behold, a year after he died, who came to Israel?
your mother.
My mother. She was an independent lady. She had an apartment, and she said to me, I said, "How are you doing in Israel, Mom?" She said, "Wonderful." She said, "I want to tell you something." She called me Meshka, not Gus. It's the first time in my life since leaving Czechoslovakia that I feel at home. I said, "Why, Ma?" She says, "Because I can walk around in my own house nude." Which you couldn't do in Rhodesia because there was always somebody in the house. And she was very happy here. And my father died in Rhodesia. I've been to see him there a few times. The last time I went to Rhodesia was 18 years ago. And I said, "I'll never ever return because of what's happened there." I was very sad. I had tears in my eyes because I saw what happened to the people in Rhodesia, which was a tragedy. But more than everybody knows what's going on there, so I won't say anything more about it. I'm not only talking about that, I'm talking about a people of Rhodesia, meaning the people of Rhodesia, black and white. What he's done to his brethren is beyond all conception. I can't conceive it.
Okay.
That's why I'm in Israel.